Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in 1882 Nevada, dark frontier mystery, the tavern that hid the unthinkable. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. The year was 1882, and the high desert wind cut through the timbered hills just north of Virginia City, a place whose brief prosperity had already begun to crumble. The once roaring mines now yielded more dust than silver, and many who stayed behind did so out of stubbornness rather than fortune. Among the small trails leading west from the town stood a tavern with no official name, only a crude wooden sign etched faintly with the words, "Room Supper." It was said to have been built by a prospector named Elias Finch around 1874, when the Comstock lode was still whispering promises of wealth to the desperate. Those who passed through described the tavern as oddly quiet, though never empty. Travelers said it felt like a place that breathed differently, as one stagecoach driver later wrote in his journal. Finch himself was rarely seen after sundown, leaving most of the work to his wife Clara and a silent hired hand known only as Harrow. A small corral, a water trough, and 2 oil lamps were the only signs of welcome for miles. The first report we find, buried in Story County's 1883 property records, lists the structure as unoccupied and in decline. But that record conflicts with earlier notes from the local postmaster, who recalled delivering correspondence there as late as autumn 1882. Such inconsistencies were common in the outer settlements, where the line between myth and memory blurred easily. Still, the tavern stood, unclaimed but not forgotten. According to an early mention in the Virginia Citizen territorial enterprise, a few travelers who sought shelter in the tavern during a sandstorm described an unwholesome stillness and the scent of kerosene heavy in the air. When morning came, the travelers departed. Yet one of them, a young surveyor named Lyle Benton, was never seen again. His notebook was later found near 6 Mile Canyon, its last entry dated October 14, 1882. The couple watch me from the stair. I cannot tell if they are smiling. As noted in early accounts from Virginia City, Nevada, the frontier was never kind to those who lingered alone. Yet even among the usual tragedies of the West, mine collapses, lost caravans, fevers, the Finch Tavern held a reputation that unsettled even the locals. It was said that no one ever stayed more than one night without hearing footsteps in the hall long after the lamps had been extinguished. And in the weeks that followed Benton's disappearance, 2 more travelers failed to reach their destinations. The winter of 1882 brought thin snow and heavy silence to the hills around the Finch Tavern. By January, the surrounding trails were nearly impassable, and only freight wagons from Virginia City dared to pass through. One of those teamsters, Samuel Dane, later testified before the Story County magistrate that he had stopped for water at the tavern one evening near dusk. What he remembered most wasn't the cold, but the stillness. Even the mules wouldn't drink, his statement read. They just stood there, heads low, ears back, like they could hear something I couldn't. Inside, the place smelled of old smoke and boiled linen. Clara Finch appeared from behind the counter, her apron spotless, yet her eyes red-rimmed as if from sleepless nights. Elias remained upstairs, according to her, unwell from the cold air. Dane swore he heard the creak of a boot from the upper hall while she spoke, followed by what sounded like a muffled cough. But when I looked up, he said, there was no one on the landing. Local gossip moved faster than the mail coaches. The constable in Virginia City noted 3 separate accounts of missing travelers between December 1882 and March 1883, all last seen near the same road bend that led to the tavern. In his own ledger he wrote, "The Finch property remains occupied, though seldom illuminated." Around this same time, an article in the Territorial Enterprise revisited the lingering stories of the place, referencing earlier reports tied to the rough outlying settlements north of Virginia City, Nevada. The piece suggested that isolation bred both superstition and tragedy. Too few neighbors, too many secrets. Yet, despite its skeptical tone, the article closed with an unsettling observation. that every witness, even the skeptical ones, spoke of the same smell, kerosene and damp wood, as though the tavern itself were preserving something beneath its floors. By spring, the snowmelt revealed churned soil behind the tavern's small stable. County Surveyor John Harper recorded that the ground appeared disturbed, as if from new drainage or shallow burial. But no official search followed. The sheriff had been called south to handle a mine dispute, and Harper's note was filed away among mundane maintenance records. When a prospector's mule team went missing that April, and one of the animals was later found tethered near the Finch fence post, the townsfolk whispered what they had long suspected, that something in that house demanded quiet. It was Clara Finch who was last seen alive that summer, walking toward the ridge road under a bruised sky, carrying nothing but a small lantern and her husband's Bible. Her body was never recovered. By autumn of 1883, the Finch Tavern was little more than a rumor on the trade route. Wagoners avoided the hill road, taking the longer southern pass instead. The few who did venture near said the tavern's shutters hung loose, swinging against the siding with every gust. The lamp over the door, once a faint beacon to lost travelers, was cracked, its wick rotted black. A deputy named Charles Harlow was the first to conduct a formal inquiry that October. Acting on orders from the Story County Sheriff's Office, he documented the structure as partially occupied, signs of previous residence, but none current. What he found upstairs became the subject of quiet debate for years to come. The bed frames were still neatly made, though dust lay thick on every surface. On one nightstand, Harlow noted a shallow dish of dried lavender and a small hand mirror smeared with what he described as oily residue. Beneath the floorboards near the stairs, he discovered a folded scrap of paper, a torn page from a family Bible, the name Elias Finch half legible through the dirt. When the deputy returned to Virginia City with his report, the county clerk filed it without comment. The paper still exists in fragments among the archives there. Its ink faded almost to gray. Around this time, the tavern became the subject of whispered superstition. Freight drivers would tip their hats as they passed the fork leading toward it, muttering, "For the souls that stayed too long." Even the few ranchers who settled nearby swore that smoke sometimes rose from the chimney, though no one had lived there in months. It was a journalist from the Virginia City Chronicle who rekindled attention to the story in 1885. His name was Edwin Glass, a young reporter known for chasing odd tales of the frontier. Glass claimed he had spent one night inside the tavern, documenting the creaks and drafts, noting how the sound of footsteps seemed to travel up rather than across the floor. In his article, he wrote, "It felt as if the building remembered how to breathe." Later, in a personal note discovered among Glass's possessions, he mentioned revisiting the area with a local historian familiar with the Virginia City, Nevada mining records. The historian told him that Elias Finch had once been employed as a night watchman at a silver mill, a place notorious for accidents involving kerosene lamps and suffocation from trapped gas. That connection, though never proven, explained the strange insistence on keeping lamps lit throughout the tavern, even when guests complained of the smell. By the time Glass's article was printed, the tavern had already burned once, a small fire that charred the porch but left the main structure intact. No cause was listed in the marshal's notes, though the word accelerant appears faintly in the margin. After that, locals stopped calling it Finch's Place. They began referring to it only as the Tavern on the Rise. In 1886, a wagon convoy out of Carson City recorded stopping briefly near what they called the ruined Inn by the Ridge. The driver's log, later recovered by archivist Helen Crane, described a curious sight. Door unlatched, inside cold, though embers still faint in stove. No signs of life, save a chair turned toward the window. He did not stay to investigate further. That same year, Reverend Malcolm Greaves of the Virginia City Parish led a small mission group through the area to deliver supplies to ranch families. When they passed the tavern, he insisted on stopping. His journal, preserved in the diocesan collection, recounts his unease. The air about the structure felt spoiled, as if warmed by no honest sun. I sensed more memory than presence there. Greaves and his companions entered only briefly, finding children's shoes in a trunk upstairs, and curiously, a set of hymn sheets pinned to the wall with nails. No official ownership was recorded after 1885, yet the property taxes continued to be paid under the name of Elias Finch until 1891. When questioned, the county treasurer could not identify who made the payments, only that envelopes containing exact sums appeared annually in the drop box before collection day. The handwriting, noted the clerk, looked tremulous but deliberate. By 1888, settlers from Dayton began claiming they saw lamplight in the tavern windows long after midnight. One rancher told the Territorial Enterprise that the glow was steady, like someone waiting for a coach that never came. The article dismissed it as atmospheric reflection, though others weren't so certain. That winter, 2 miners on their way to Virginia City took refuge in the tavern during a snowstorm. Only one, William Crane, survived. When questioned in the spring thaw, Crane said little beyond this. There were footsteps above us all night, and in the morning, my partner's bed was empty, though the blanket was still warm. Authorities investigated once more, finding no trace of the missing man. However, they discovered new boards laid across the cellar floor, secured by fresh nails that did not match the rest of the construction. Deputy Harlow, now older and reluctant, declined to reopen the planks. In his 1889 statement he wrote, "There are matters best left under their own weight." The tavern's reputation grew darker still. Schoolchildren in Virginia City recited rhymes about it. Something about the woman who walks with a lamp. Travelers avoided it completely by the early 1890s, taking even the longer canyon route to steer clear. Yet the structure endured, never fully collapsing, its walls dry as bone in the desert air. Scholars who later studied the settlement records from Virginia City, Nevada, observed how meticulously Finch's name vanished from all correspondence after 1883, as if erased by design. His employment papers ended mid-line, his mining contracts unsigned. It was as though he had stepped out of the decade altogether, leaving behind only the tavern, a hollow ledger of whatever debt remained unpaid. By 1890, the Finch Tavern had become a destination for the curious rather than the weary. Young men from Virginia City and Gold Hill would ride out on dares, wagering who could last the night inside. Most never stayed past midnight. One account found in a private diary belonging to miner's son Albert Ketch described hearing a woman's voice calling from the hallway, polite, almost gentle, asking if the lamps were still burning. He fled before dawn, but not before noticing a shadow move across the window from the inside, though the door remained bolted. In late summer that year, a traveling photographer, Harold Penn, visited the area to document the dying mining towns. He took one plate of the tavern, a fogged daguerreotype showing the porch and a figure that, according to Penn, had not been visible when he framed the shot. "Perhaps a reflection," he wrote to his publisher, "but the pose is too clear, as though waiting to be seen." The plate, kept in Penn's effects, later tarnished beyond recognition. Only his letter survives in a Nevada archive. In 1891, another tax payment was delivered under Elias Finch's name, and then abruptly the record ceased. No one knew who had sent the last envelope. County Treasurer Latham wrote, "The handwriting appears feminine and careful, likely the wife, though reports place her long deceased." With the turn of the decade, official interest waned. The tavern stood weathered but upright, its boards gray, its windows black. Occasionally, ranchers reported strange finds nearby: a child's brooch, a rusted dinner fork, a woman's glove, objects too refined for the region's rough travelers. Some believed the Finch family had entertained guests of higher means once, perhaps drifters from the city seeking quiet. Others whispered it had been a stop for fugitives, or worse, a place where secrets could be bought. In 1893, a small fire consumed part of the second floor. Witnesses said it began near the old lamp shelf in the upper hall, though no one could determine what ignited it. The smell of kerosene lingered for days. Sheriff Abel Pritchard noted in his report, though flames were localized, all mirrors inside were found cracked or darkened, as if from within. 1 year later, a professor from the University of Nevada, Dr. Julian Hurst, came to document the region's mining-era architecture. He described the tavern as a structure in which time refuses to pass evenly. His papers mention an unusual chill within, and that every photograph taken of the interior produced faint distortions around the stairwell. Dr. Hurst's assistant later claimed he heard whispers in the dark that matched Clara Finch's name, an assertion Hurst never confirmed, but also never denied. In one letter, he wrote to a colleague, "It is as if the house desires remembrance more than repair." By 1895, the locals had begun calling the hill Finch Hollow. Children would leave small stones at the gatepost before sundown, muttering good night, a habit no one taught them, but none dared question. By 1896, Finch Hollow was all but abandoned. The mines had gone quiet, and the last mail coach between Dayton and Virginia City made its run that spring before the route was dissolved. Still, the tavern stood against the wind like a stubborn relic, its upper eaves creaking with every gust that swept through the canyon. In June of that year, a schoolteacher named Martha Elling took lodging with a nearby ranch family. Her letters to her sister, preserved in the Washoe County archives, mention passing the old tavern twice a week on her walk to the schoolhouse. "I never see movement inside," she wrote, "but the curtains seem different each day, as though drawn by a careful hand." She also described hearing a faint tapping, rhythmic and steady, from within the walls whenever she passed close enough to the fence. One evening, she decided to investigate. Carrying a lantern, she stepped through the half-collapsed porch and found the door slightly ajar. Inside, everything was coated in pale dust, yet the center table was clean, a single lamp resting there, filled with fresh oil. "I did not strike a match," her letter ends, "for I felt that it might strike back." Around the same period, prospectors reported finding a shallow depression near the property, where rainwater gathered unnaturally even in the dry months. Beneath the mud, a partial wooden crate surfaced, its sides blackened but intact. When opened, it revealed several small belongings, a comb, a ring, a pocket Bible, and a page torn from a ledger marked Room 3, Paid. The handwriting, though blurred, bore a remarkable resemblance to early registry entries once kept in Virginia City inns of that era. As noted later by regional historians studying Virginia City, Nevada, such records often reflected both transient guests and unlicensed lodgings that operated between formal establishments. It's possible the Finch tease. Tavern hosted more travelers than the official census ever recorded, people passing through without leaving a trace in the county books. That quiet omission would explain the unaccounted belongings later unearthed near the site. In 1898, a brief report in the Silver State Sentinel mentioned the tavern once again, this time under the headline, "Deserted Inn to be Razed." Plans were drawn to dismantle the structure for timber salvage, yet when workers arrived in early August, they refused to proceed. Foreman Jacob Reed wrote in his diary that the boards bled sap when struck, an image that horrified his crew. 3 men quit by nightfall. The order to dismantle was quietly withdrawn, and the building was left to rot. By century's end, Finch Hollow had been omitted from new maps. The land reverted to county claim, marked simply as abandoned site. Still, travelers who wandered too far west of Virginia City claimed that, on windless nights, they could see a faint orange glow across the ridge. Not fire, not lantern light, but something steady and waiting, as if the tavern itself refused to darken completely. When the century turned, so did the stories. By 1901, Finch Hollow was more legend than landmark, whispered by the few miners who still combed the hills for forgotten veins of silver. The road that once led to the tavern was now overgrown with sage and thistle. Still, an occasional rider or surveyor would return with the same uneasy report, that the tavern remained standing, though no one had maintained it for over a decade. That year, a traveling doctor named Lucian Ward passed through on his way from Reno to Virginia City. His medical diary, discovered years later, contained an uncharacteristically emotional entry dated August 17, 1901. Stopped near the Finch Hollow Tavern. Heard someone humming from inside. The tune resembled an old hymn. though the building was clearly vacant. I remained outside, yet the melody continued until I mounted my horse again. It stopped the moment I turned the bend. Dr. Ward was known to be a skeptic, not prone to fancy or folklore, yet his note was written with what archivists later called startled precision, as if he wished to convince himself it truly happened. Around that same time, small groups of university students began touring the ruins of the old mining corridor. One such visitor, a geology student named Clara Yates, kept detailed field notes describing the architecture of the abandoned tavern. Her entry from September 1902 reads, "The stairs are partially collapsed but sound beneath the dust. In the parlor, a scent of kerosene lingers. I found a brass key on the windowsill engraved R3. It felt warm, though the air was cold." She took the key back to her lodging in Dayton, but when she returned the next morning, it was gone from her satchel. A few locals at the time speculated that squatters occasionally used the building, runaways perhaps, or prospectors sleeping off drink. Yet no signs of recent campfires or discarded tools were ever found. The house remained empty, but for the soft accumulation of sand at its threshold, as if nature itself avoided entry. In 1904, the Nevada Tribune published a short piece referencing the history of Virginia City, Nevada, describing the Finch Tavern as one of the last remnants of a frontier that refused to die. The article treated the stories as folklore, ghosts of the mining boom, they said, but acknowledged the eerie consistency across decades of reports. People might invent names, but not identical sensations: the smell of kerosene, the weight of silence, the sense of being watched from an upper window. By 1905, another small fire, the third on record, consumed the north wall of the tavern. Rain that season was scarce, yet lightning had struck within sight of the ridge the same week. A rancher named Deacon Field claimed he saw a lone figure standing in the doorway as smoke rose. "Looked like a woman," he told neighbors, holding a lamp against the storm. The next morning the tavern was blackened but still upright, and still no one dared to enter. The following years brought little change to Finch Hollow, yet its legend deepened like sediment. By 1907, the site had become a local cautionary tale for children, a story told to keep them from wandering too far from the road. "If you see the lamp burning," parents would warn, "walk faster and don't look back." That same year, a team of railway surveyors marking possible expansion routes from Carson City made camp within sight of the tavern. The foreman, Thomas Eldon, recorded in his nightly log, "Light seen in the window facing west, sent 2 men to investigate. Upon return, they swore the inside smelled of oil and oranges, though no fruit could be found." The survey team left early the next morning, but Eldon's tone in the following pages changed. Shorter entries, anxious phrasing, a repeated note. "The house hums when the wind dies." 2 months later, a stray fire swept through the surrounding brush, but stopped abruptly just yards from the tavern itself, as if held at bay by invisible boundaries. The phenomenon puzzled locals. The Virginia City Fire Watch issued a brief report concluding that air currents from the ridge may have prevented ignition, though one witness swore the flames bent away from the building. Newspaper interest briefly reignited when an amateur historian, Walter Creer, began compiling stories of frontier vanishings for a serialized column titled Echoes of the Old West. His article, The Unfinished Ledger, revisited the case of Elias and Clara Finch, drawing from surviving county ledgers and earlier publications from Virginia City, Nevada. Creer proposed that the tavern had served as an unlicensed refuge for injured miners during the silver boom, a theory that, if true, might explain the constant odor of kerosene used as disinfectant in field surgery. But even he admitted the testimonies didn't fit neatly. "Too many names," he wrote, and too few graves." That column stirred public interest again. A few curious travelers arrived hoping to see the site, but none stayed long. One young couple from Sacramento reportedly camped near the ridge in September 1908 and vanished overnight. Their wagon was later discovered half a mile downhill, horses still tethered, untouched. By 1910, The county survey map officially marked the area as uninhabited, yet records show that property tax was once again paid, not under the Finch name this time, but under the initials CF. The payment came in the same handwriting as the old receipts from the 1880s. Experts later compared the script and found no clear match to any known resident. When the final mine closed in 1912, most of the surrounding settlements were abandoned for good. Still, travelers on the new state road claimed that from certain angles they could see the outline of a tall, narrow structure on the ridge at dusk, a house with one upper window faintly glowing. No one could say for sure if the tavern still stood, or if it was only the light that refused to die. By 1913, Finch Hollow existed mostly in recollection, a ghost in the county records, fading even as clerks copied over the old ledgers. That year, a new district assessor, Henry Probst, attempted to verify all standing properties west of Virginia City. When he reached the ridge, he found nothing but the tavern's stone foundation, scorched black, and what appeared to be remnants of glass along the perimeter. Yet what disturbed him most was the smell. Faint, oily, unmistakable kerosene. It was as though the fire had only just gone out, he wrote. Probst's findings were filed, stamped, and forgotten, but an addendum in his notes reads, "Strange light seen at distance on second night. Resembled lantern reflection, but no movement detected." Local folklore had by then woven itself fully around the Finch name. Old-timers in Virginia City claimed Elias had never perished, but simply walked into the desert one night, following a voice no one else heard. Others believed Clara lingered in the house long after her husband vanished, waiting for guests who would never come. One particularly grim version told that she offered a room and a light to lost travelers, and that those who accepted were never seen again. That winter, a small team from the Nevada Historical Society arrived to document surviving frontier architecture. Among them was researcher Lydia Boone, who later published a modest pamphlet titled Houses That Wait. She described Finch Hollow as a ruin of strong bones and bad memory, noting how its walls still stood to shoulder height. Inside, she found fragments of china, a scorched ledger cover, and several rusted lamp bases fused by heat. On one, faint letters were still legible. R3, paid. Boone compared the handwriting to census signatures from Virginia City, Nevada, determining that at least 2 belonged to Clara Finch. Her penmanship was elegant, she wrote, but the slant is heavy, downward, like someone writing against the grain. Boone's quiet reflection suggested she doubted the tavern had ever served a simple purpose. When asked by colleagues about her impressions of the place, she offered only one remark, recorded in an interview transcript. "I've visited many ruins. This one felt aware of being visited." Not long after Boone's report circulated, 2 prospectors were said to have camped near the ridge. Their tent was found days later, collapsed, but untouched. The men were never identified. By 1915, Finch Hollow was struck from the official land registry. No ownership, no tax line, no coordinates. Yet travelers' letters continued to reference a dim glow along the horizon west of Virginia City. Not fire, not reflection, but something constant. The railway workers who laid new track miles away claimed to see it too, just before dusk. One foreman joked, "That's old Finch keeping the lamp trimmed." The others didn't laugh. The years following 1915 brought quiet to the ridge. The road that once wound toward Finch Hollow disappeared beneath the brush, and with it faded nearly all memory of the tavern. Only the oldest residents of Virginia City, Nevada, spoke of it now, usually in hushed tones by firelight. Among them was Nora Briggs, who had been a girl when the Finch place still stood. In 1917, she gave a short interview to a traveling folklorist named Herman Lyle, who was collecting tales of vanishing houses across the frontier. Her account, preserved in the Library of Nevada Transcripts, was strikingly calm. "It wasn't evil," she said. "It was lonely, like it waited too long for company and forgot how to stop waiting." Briggs remembered seeing the Finches once, when she was perhaps 8 years old. Clara, she said, carried herself with Sunday manners, always holding a handkerchief near her mouth, Elias, however, seemed distant, like someone listening for something that wasn't there yet. Lyle spent one evening near the ridge himself, but did not approach. He wrote in his notes, "Sound carries oddly in this basin. The air feels layered, as though a voice might answer before it's spoken." That detail appeared again in his later book, which dedicated a full chapter to what he called the house that listened. In the spring of 1918, a mail courier passing through Dayton swore he had seen a flicker of lamplight high on the ridge just before dawn. He told the telegraph clerk, who recorded his statement simply as observation of interest. A week later, another traveler, a ranch hand moving cattle north, reported the same thing. A small, steady light, unmoving, just where the tavern had stood decades earlier. It might have ended there, just another superstition carried forward, if not for an unusual discovery that autumn. A group of boys exploring the canyon stumbled upon a half-eye chest near the old trailhead. Inside were fragments of bone, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, along with 2 rusted keys and a cracked mirror plate. County Coroner Dr. Ellery James examined the remains, but could determine little beyond that they were human, adult, and likely female. He noted scorch marks on the bones consistent with exposure to high heat. In his margin, he wrote a single line, "Not burned where found." The bones were buried quietly in the Virginia City Cemetery, under an unmarked stone. When asked by local press if the remains might belong to Clara Finch, Dr. James answered only, "It would explain much, but prove nothing." By the end of that year, Finch Hollow was a name spoken mostly in jest, an echo of ghost stories traded at saloons. Yet in every retelling, one image remained the same, a lone lamp burning behind a window on the ridge, its flame steady even in rain. And though no one could remember the last time they'd seen the structure itself, everyone swore the light had not moved. By 1919, the first signs of a new era reached Nevada. Motorcars began to replace horses on the desert roads, and the world beyond the mountains grew noisier with modern ambition. Yet Finch Hollow, distant and unrecorded, resisted change. Travelers passing through the region found it eerily untouched. No homesteads, no remnants of recent work, just the same windswept basin and a line of stones marking where the tavern once stood. That spring, a young survey engineer named Patrick Klein was assigned to map mineral deposits for a new state initiative. His field journal from April 22 reads, "Marked faint foundation lines west of Virginia City. Soil unusually compact. Detected odor of lamp oil, though surface shows no seepage." In the margin he added, "Heard humming, not wind." Klein was rational and technical in his writing. Nothing in his prior notes suggested superstition. Still, his entry continued for 3 pages, describing his impression of the place with unexpected emotion. "It feels observed, as if the ground itself carries memory. I could swear I saw a faint orange gleam near the far ridge, but no structure could be found. The light stayed in place while the horizon shifted with the sun." A week later, Klein sent a letter to his superior requesting reassignment. His reason: topography incompatible with equipment. He never returned to that sector. Later that same year, a family traveling from Reno to Carson City camped along the ridge. They awoke to find their tent poles cut cleanly through, yet their wagon untouched. The father claimed to have smelled kerosene moments before dawn, though no lantern had been lit. His wife later told neighbors she dreamt of a woman holding a lamp near the window, though she could not recall having ever seen the building. In December 1920, the Nevada Register printed a retrospective column titled "Lost Corners of the Frontier." Among the listings, Finch Hollow received a brief mention. A tavern built by Elias and Clara Finch, burned in the late 19th century, known for its inexplicable endurance in regional lore. The piece cited research drawn from Virginia City, Nevada archives, noting how the Finch property appeared in tax rolls long after both owners were presumed dead. The author concluded that such persistence of record may reflect a clerk's error, or perhaps a ghostly echo of bureaucracy. The article stirred little public reaction, but one historian from the State University, Dr. Warren Bell, took interest. In a letter to a colleague, he wrote, "It may sound fanciful, But certain places do not end when burned. They continue administratively, as though the county itself forgets how to close the file. He visited the ridge in early 1921, collecting soil samples and sketches of the foundation. In his notebook, he described the air as still but charged, the silence crowded with afterthought. That was his final entry on Finch Hollow. By the spring of 1922, the Finch Hollow site was little more than a curiosity to historians and the occasional photographer, yet those who ventured close returned with the same refrain, the smell of oil, the hum of silence. One of them, a visiting journalist from San Francisco named Alistair Keene, had been writing a travel column on forgotten Western settlements. He visited the ridge in May and filed a report titled, "The House That Refused to Die." Keene's article began plainly enough, describing the road's disrepair and the stubbornness of sagebrush reclaiming the trail. But halfway through, his tone changed. He wrote, "The soil near the foundation feels warm beneath the boots, though the air above it is cold. I struck a match for my pipe, and the flame bent toward the earth rather than the wind." The piece was widely read, half admired, half dismissed as imaginative prose. Still, Keene's account revived public fascination. A few thrill-seekers from Reno rode out that summer, hoping to find the haunted Tavern ruins. One group returned, claiming to have seen faint footprints circling the site, small, bare, and freshly pressed into the dust. Another, more skeptical visitor, noted that every time he turned away, he felt certain someone was standing just behind him. Later that year, the Nevada Historical Society received a letter from an anonymous writer enclosing a set of 3 aged photographs. Each showed what appeared to be the same hill at twilight. In the first, the ridge was empty. In the second, a faint rectangular shadow appeared where the tavern once stood. In the third, a glimmer of light showed through the outline, soft, like lamplight behind old glass. No photographer's signature was visible, and the negatives were never found. By 1924, Dr. Warren Bell, who had earlier studied the Finch property, revisited the site with 2 assistants. His report, Pierre, served in university archives, reads with cautious disbelief. While collecting remaining foundation fragments, heard distinct rhythmic tapping from below ground. Subsurface excavation revealed only packed soil. No fauna or root system could explain the sound. Bell's notes continued over several pages, growing increasingly uneasy. Repeated tapping, faint odor of kerosene upon striking the spade, advised team to depart, left site unmarked. The event unsettled him for the rest of his life. In a lecture years later, when asked about the hollow, he smiled faintly and said, "Some structures unlearn silence slower than others." The Finch legend persisted quietly. Though Virginia City had entered its post-boom calm, the surrounding hills still bore its ghosts, shafts, timbers, stone foundations. Yet among all these remnants, the tavern alone carried a name, a story, and a light that refused to fade. Local residents claimed that, even into the 1920s, travelers at dusk could see the faintest orange reflection across the horizon. One miner described it best, like a memory that never knew how to end. By 1925, Finch Hollow was a place known more in memory than on maps. The younger generation of Virginia City, Nevada, had grown up hearing its story only through the murmurs of grandparents. How the Finches built a house too far from town, how it endured fire after fire without vanishing entirely. For most, it was simply folklore, a desert myth. That changed when a new prospector, Lionel Daves, leased nearby land for exploratory drilling. His records, still preserved in the Nevada Mining Bureau, list several days of unexplained delays caused by unsettling vibrations at night. Daves initially blamed wind against the drill frame, but on the third night he recorded something different. A rhythmic sound below the surface, 5 to 6 knocks in sequence, intervals regular, ceased at dawn. He noted also a flicker of light along the ridge line, visible through his telescope at precisely 3:00 a.m. Thinking it was another campfire, Daves rode up the next morning. No camp remained, only disturbed soil and fragments of blackened glass. In his report to the Bureau, he added a line that was later struck through by the clerk. It smelled of burned oil, not smoke. That same year, a small academic circle in Reno began compiling what they called frontier anomalies, short case summaries of unexplained 19th century incidents. Finch Hollow appeared as entry number 7. The summary concluded that the building had likely served as an illicit refuge for injured or fugitive miners, its secrecy sustained by isolation. Still, even the most pragmatic contributors admitted the persistence of light sightings beyond rational accounting. Meanwhile, an elderly former stagecoach driver named Amos Wilder gave an interview to a local paper. His recollection dated back to the 1880s. "I stopped there once. The woman said her husband was asleep. There was music somewhere, a humming, low and steady. I left before morning, and every mile down the road the hum followed in my ears." His words, gentle but unwavering, reignited fascination with the Finch case. In the autumn of 1926, a storm swept across the valley, lightning striking repeatedly near the ridge. The next morning, a few locals climbed the slope expecting to find brush fires. Instead, they found a new opening in the earth, a shallow sink, perfectly circular, where the tavern's cellar once stood. Within it lay splintered beams, fragments of crockery, and something metallic, a rusted oil lamp with traces of wick still inside. The lamp's reservoir was sealed tight, yet when shaken it sloshed faintly, as though half full. The object was taken to the county office, where the clerk, out of curiosity, tried to open it. The cap refused to turn. Frustrated, he set it aside. Later that evening, the clerk returned to find the lamp cool, but the faint smell of kerosene hung in the air. It was placed into the regional archive, catalogued simply as Lamp, Finch Hollow, circa 1880s. Visitors who viewed it in later years claimed that under dim light it seemed to gleam faintly, as if its contents still waited to be burned. By the winter of 1927, the Finch Hollow lamp had already become a minor curiosity in Nevada's small circle of historians. Housed in a display case at the Virginia City Records Office, it sat among other relics of the mining era, rusted tools, cracked photographs, scraps of ledgers, but visitors often paused longest at the lamp. Even unlit, its metal base carried a faint warmth, and more than one clerk mentioned catching the smell of kerosene after closing hours. That year, a graduate researcher named Howard Peake arrived from the University of Nevada to study the region's post-mining folklore. His thesis, later published in small circulation, treated the Finch story not as superstition, but as an artifact of collective isolation. He spent 3 nights camping near the ridge, describing the silence as dense, like fabric stretched across the desert. In his field notebook, he recorded strange fluctuations in his lantern flame. Wind absent. Still, the light bends inward, as though drawn. Peake later presented his findings to a small academic audience, arguing that the recurring reports, lights, scents, sounds, represented the psychological residue of abandonment. The human mind, he wrote, creates company where memory refuses to fade. It was a tidy conclusion, well received. But in a private letter to a colleague, discovered decades later, Peake added an unsettling footnote. "On my last night, I saw a faint orange glow where no structure remains. It persisted even when I closed my eyes." In early 1928, a brief earthquake rattled the region. The tremor dislodged part of the old ridge trail and exposed what appeared to be the remains of a wooden beam, blackened and buried deep. A passing rancher unearthed it, recognizing the faint imprint of decorative carving, the same pattern seen on surviving Tavern photographs from Virginia City, Nevada archives. It seemed impossible that wood burned 4 decades earlier could remain intact beneath the surface, yet the beam was solid, dry, and carried no scent of ash. Only when moved into sunlight did it begin to crack along its length, exuding the faint smell of lamp oil once more. County officials debated whether to seal off the area, but no one followed through. Finch Hollow was remote, unprofitable, and uncharted. Whatever it had been, it no longer threatened anyone, or so they assumed. That summer, a group of prospectors passing nearby claimed to see figures on the ridge at dusk, 5 silhouettes standing in a line before what looked like a house's faint outline. One of the men shouted, and the figures turned, revealing nothing but a shimmer of light, as if glass catching sunset. When they approached, the ridge was empty. The air smelled faintly of smoke and oil. They told no one officially, fearing ridicule, but word traveled fast. For a few months, travelers once again began leaving small offerings at the road fork: coins, flowers, stones. Not out of fear, but habit. As one rancher put it, it's just good manners to nod to what remembers you. The year 1929 arrived with a biting wind that seemed to strip the Nevada hills bare of sound. Finch Hollow had become a destination for only the most persistent wanderers, historians, drifters, and a handful of spiritualists chasing what they called residual presence. One such visitor, a woman named Lydia Kern from San Francisco, arrived in March to conduct seances for a series of magazine features on haunted Western sites. Her companion, a photographer named Ezra Pike, recorded her sessions in his logbook. On the first night, Kern set a small table where the Tavern Foundation once stood. She lit a single candle and recited what she called an invitation of memory. Pike described the air growing heavy, the flame stretching thin, as though leaning toward a draft that never came. Moments later, Kern began to whisper in a voice not her own, repeating 3 words over and over: paid in full. The session ended abruptly when the candle extinguished itself. The next morning, Pike developed his glass plates. The first few were blank, but the last image, taken moments before the candle went out, showed the faint outline of a woman's face reflected in the glass surface of the table. The features were indistinct but eerily symmetrical, framed by what looked like a bonnet. The photograph was later lost when Pike's studio burned the following year. Word of Kern's experience spread quickly through Virginia City, Nevada, reviving old talk of the Finch family and their tavern. Elderly residents recalled the same phrase, paid in full, once written across the last pages of the tavern's guest ledger. That coincidence unsettled even the skeptics. By summer, a few adventurous reporters arrived, hoping to witness something similar. One, writing for the Reno Gazette, spent 2 nights at the ridge and heard nothing but wind. Yet in his closing line he admitted, "The silence feels purposeful, like a room expecting a visitor." That autumn, a shepherd grazing his flock near the basin returned to town with an odd story. At dusk, he claimed, one of his lambs wandered toward the ridge, bleating frantically. As he followed, he saw a faint glow moving between the sagebrush, too low for lightning, too high for fire. When he reached the ridge, the glow vanished, leaving behind only the smell of burned oil. Locals said little, merely nodding. "It's the hollow," one man told him, "settling its own debts." By winter, even the curious stopped coming. The land grew silent again, though travelers on the main road still swore they could glimpse a flicker on the ridge from time to time, a reminder of a tavern that no longer stood, and of those who had once kept its lamps burning. One final note appeared that year in the county surveyor's office, written in unfamiliar handwriting and unsigned. It read, "The light remains steady, no repairs required." By 1930, the name Finch Hollow had nearly disappeared from official reference. Maps labeled the area as private tract, uninhabited, and the last road marker that once pointed west from Virginia City, Nevada, had long since fallen. But some things persist quietly, like the smell of kerosene lingering after a fire long gone cold. That spring, a young archaeologist named Thomas Vail arrived to conduct a state survey of forgotten settlements. His report, filed under the Nevada Historical Program, includes a section labeled Hollow Ridge Site. He described finding remnants of brick and beam, evidence of domestic structure, dimensions suggesting lodging. He also noted a faint residue on the stones, greasy to the touch, smelling of oil, though exposure should have erased all trace. On the second evening of his survey, Vail set camp near the old foundation. His diary, still preserved in university archives, begins as methodical field notation and gradually shifts into something more personal. "At dusk," he wrote, The wind ceased entirely. Heard a faint clinking, metal against metal, like a chain or a lantern hook. The sound seemed to circle the ruins, though no one was present. When I turned, I saw a dull orange pulse across the ridge wall, not flame, but reflection. Later that night he wrote, "Awoke to strong odor of oil. My lantern extinguished, yet the air glowed faintly, like embers through fog." Vail left the site the next morning, shaken but unhurt. Upon returning to Carson City, he submitted his findings without the final pages of his journal. Those missing notes were discovered years later, tucked into the back of a field atlas. The final line read simply, "The light was below the ground." That phrase circulated among archivists for years, a curiosity, nothing more. But one assistant in the 1940s, while reclassifying Vail's collection, remarked that the paper itself smelled faintly of lamp oil, though it had been sealed for decades. Around the same period, a storm washed through the region, unearthing fragments of glass once again. A highway crew clearing the new pass found a rusted doorknob, perfectly intact, its brass faintly etched with the initials CF. The object was sent to the State Museum, where it remains catalogued but never displayed. Visitors who handle the storage drawer sometimes remark that the metal feels warmer than the others. By the early 1930s, Finch Hollow was spoken of rarely, and always with distance. For those who remembered, it had become a symbol of endurance, of how certain places refuse erasure. As one old miner told a journalist in 1931, "You can burn a house, bury its name, and lose its records, but if the lamp's still lit somewhere, it's still waiting." By 1931, the ridge that once held the Finch Tavern was nothing more than a rise of stones overlooking the long, empty basin. The desert had reclaimed most of it, but the stories, like dust, clung to everything nearby. In Virginia City, Nevada, a small historical society opened a display titled "The Vanished Frontier." Among the mining picks and wagon wheels sat a single sealed glass case, inside the Finch Hollow lamp. Visitors described an odd reaction upon standing near it. Some swore they could feel a faint warmth radiating through the glass, even though the case was sealed airtight. Others said that when they leaned close enough, the faintest scent of oil rose, sharp and clean, like something waiting to burn. That summer, the Society's caretaker, Mrs. Evelyn Marks, began noticing small changes in the display. "The wick moves," she told her assistant, "only slightly, but enough to tell." Her assistant laughed it off until one evening when both women watched the wick flicker in place without a flame. Marks recorded the occurrence in the nightly logbook. Movement detected at 8:47 p.m. Air still, no vibration in room. A few weeks later, a professor from the University of Nevada visited the exhibition to verify its authenticity. He noted the same warmth, describing it as residual chemical energy, though he could not explain how any residue remained after nearly 50 years. He asked that the case remain sealed for the preservation of history and perhaps of peace. During that same period, a local reporter revisited the Finch Hollow story for a heritage column. His piece, titled "The Lamp That Waited," summarized nearly 50 years of rumor and record, quoting property documents, eyewitness accounts, and the writings of early travelers. His closing paragraph read, "Every record ends the same way. Someone leaves, the lamp remains. Perhaps that is all memory is. What saint is lit after everyone's gone?" The article reignited modest local fascination, and for several months, visitors once again climbed the ridge where the tavern once stood. They found little more than stones and silence. Yet several hikers returned describing the same phenomenon, light appearing across the horizon even after sundown. One woman claimed she saw a figure briefly illuminated at the ridge's edge, a woman holding something bright, steady, and sad. No one could find any physical trace afterward. By autumn, the interest faded again. The ridge grew quiet, and the last caretaker's note in the Society's logbook that year read simply, "Lamp steady, no changes observed." But years later, when the archives were moved to a new building, workers swore that the lamp's glass had clouded over completely, except for a single clear circle near its center. Through it, under certain light, they claimed you could still see the faintest glow. By the spring of 1932, Finch Hollow had faded from living memory. Only the archivists and historians of Virginia City, Nevada, still spoke its name in passing, usually when sorting through old property ledgers or damaged tax slips. The land itself was officially reclassified as barren tract, suitable only for grazing. No one objected. That same year, a pair of surveyors from Carson County were sent to chart a new route across the ridge. Their field notes mentioned no structures, only a small depression in the earth where the tavern once stood. Still, one of them, a veteran draftsman named Leland Grove, wrote something curious in the margin of his report. Lantern light visible at 2 a.m. Thought it a trick of the eyes until McHale saw it too. Orange hue, steady flame. We left without finishing the sketch. It was the last recorded sighting of the Finch Hollow light. Decades of wind and time erased what remained of the building. The stones were scattered, the soil shifted, and even the faint trail that once led to the ridge disappeared under sand. But locals who wandered too far west still claimed that on certain nights the horizon glowed faintly for a heartbeat, like a match being struck behind glass. Archivists later compiled the Finch files, county notes, photographs, tax receipts, into a single bound ledger. They called it the Hollow Record. Among its yellowed pages rests a single sheet dated October 14, 1882, the last entry written by the missing surveyor, Lyle Benton. The couple watch me from the stair. I cannot tell if they are smiling. Those words close the book. No one knows how the page found its way into the collection decades later. Today the ridge is quiet, but the story lingers in the archives, in letters, and in the faint scent that some say still haunts the museum storeroom where the Finch lamp is kept. Visitors have reported hearing the soft tick-tick of metal cooling, as though the lamp has only just gone out. Perhaps it never truly did, and maybe that is the lasting truth of Finch Hollow, that some debts are not paid with coin or confession, but with waiting until the flame decides to rest. The last caretaker's reflection, written in 1932, remains the only fitting epitaph. The light endures, not to guide travelers, but to remind the earth that someone once waited here. And so the ridge sleeps beneath the Nevada sky, its dust untroubled, its silence complete, except, some say, for the faint glimmer seen far off in the dark, where a tavern once stood that was never quite what it seemed.